Nathan Brown is with us today talking about Not Exactly Job, which is a collection of his poetry. He is a poet, musician, performer, and photographer from Norman. He holds an interdisciplinary PhD in writing from the University of Oklahoma. He teaches both at OU and in public school and community workshops. He has published several collections of poetry, one other of which and Not Exactly Job are both Oklahoma Book Award finalists. And you have time to write poetry.
Yeah, I do. I make time to write poetry. It's my favorite part of every day.
Okay. So you sit down and write poems every day?
I write a poem every day. I do. And this was something that started about 6 or 7 years ago, and it used to be a project. It used to be something that I forced myself to do. And now I get downright irritable if I don't get to it.
Well, that's great.
It's my favorite part of every day now.
Yeah,
so,
that's
yeah.
great. Now, Not Exactly Job is a collection of poetry that seems to have a theme running through it. Did you sit down and say, I'm going to write a book based on this theme, or I'm going to write a collection of poems? Or is this something, hey, I've got all this stuff that's talking about the same thing?
Right. Well, it actually is a very direct response to the Old Testament book of Job. And I grew up a preacher's kid, and in this part of the country, that means all kinds of things.
Yes, it does.
And I survived it. But I've always had a strange relationship with that world, the religious world. And not as much spiritual, but the distinction between spiritual and religious is very important to me. And basically what this is I would say a fairly secular, somewhat irreverent glance at the book of Job. And the book is laid out in the sense that it's a chapter-by-chapter response. And so I'm actually responding to certain verses, a verse or two or more within each chapter. And it was there. It was a pretty difficult time in my life, and that book I've always had a relationship with that book. It's a very unusual book in the Bible to me. And when things get really bad,
Yeah.
and so it was kind of a natural thing that just sort of happened. It wasn't planned out ahead of time. So.
Well, I appreciate your comment on the irreverence, because I think Lyle's big hair is probably an indication of just how irreverent that can be.
That was the one I picked out, by the way. Yes.
Well, would you like to read that for us?
Well, I guess I could. This is, by the way, the girl mentioned in this poem, Beth Wood. She's a wonderful songwriter, and she's a great friend of mine, and she and I do a music and poetry concert together all over. We travel around and do this. We're doing it in Norman tomorrow night at the train depot. And so this was a poem that I wrote for her. It starts out with Job from chapter 9, verse 16. And again, it's called Lyle's Big Hair. Even if I summoned him and he responded, I do not believe he would give me a hearing. My new friend Beth Wood, who can sing it like it is, tells me that for really big decisions, Lyle Lovett comes to her in her dreams at night and tells her which way to go by pointing with his big crazy hair. She says it's working well so far, and I trust people who can play guitar as well as she can. And I know this is not exactly about Job, but it has a lot to do with direction and how, even when we pray our guts out for guidance, sometimes, no, a lot of times, Lyle, with his big hair in our dreams at night, is just as good as it's going to get, and we know it. So that's So that's an indicator that this isn't going to be a treatise,
Right.
a theological treatise on the book of Job. So.
But I think it's more of a human response. Very few of us are trained in theology. Very few of us know even the context of the book of Job. And so this struck me more as the approach that most people would take. They might not want to share that with everybody, that it's got problems, it's got sharp edges, and I'm not quite sure what to do with it.
Well, the best response to that is that Molly Griffiths, after she read this book, she called me up and she said, "Oh my goodness, I just went out and bought a Bible." She said, just to read the book of Job. And that's kind of, I think, that would be the type of response I'd be hoping, for, that she wouldn't care, whether she'd read it or not before. But after she finished, she wanted to go and see what that was all about, So.
Yeah, I suspect a lot of people talk about the Bible without having read very much of it. And
It's known for being the most purchased, least read book in the world.
Absolutely.
So.
Well, I also wanted to ask you about the photos. There are a few photos. There's the striking one on the cover, but there are several that are placed in the book. Are these photos that you took?
Yeah, I took the photos. We have far western Oklahoma. I might have been in the Texas Panhandle without knowing it, but on some dirt road out there, and came across this house. And what's interesting is that these, I do art photography as well as write. I mean, photography is a big part of my life as well, and I do art shows and things with photography. What was really fun about this book, and what's totally new about it, is that the 5 photographs from this book have been turned into a large print photograph series. That now, when I travel and do readings, if anyone is having me in specifically for this book, I now travel with the photographs, and we set them up on easels around the stage, and they're kind of a part of it. And it's, as obviously, if you're writing about the book of Job, it's going to be difficult to come up with, a good photograph of Job, since
Probably.
that time is kind of past now. But for some reason, everyone just felt like this house. It was just the feeling, the absolute sparse landscape really went, the feel of it went with the book of Job and the tone of the book of Job. So,
Right.
yeah.
Well, it is kind of Job standing and trying to stand up against everything thrown at him. So.
Yeah, and it was quite a bit.
Yes.
Lost it was like a bad country song.
Right. Yes,
He
it
lost the
was.
family, he lost the kids, he lost the cows, he lost the, so.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
was.
So.
Well, I think this is a really wonderful collection of poetry.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that.
It's, as you said, it's on a very painful subject, but sometimes we have to look
Well,
at that.
and it has a little bit to do with learning to laugh in the face.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, especially with Lyle's hair poking around in there.
You can just see him pointing with that hair, pointing the way. All right, Lyle, thank you. Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you. I appreciate it very much.
Sure.
All right.
Nathan Brown has been here telling us about his collection of poetry, Not Exactly Job. You can find it at your library and your favorite bookstore.